One of the best things that happens with the sales team is when they say no to the customer and they realize that what your expertise is not a fit. It sounds so simple, but that comes from the leadership on down.
I've been in so many pitches where it's like, before we get to the demo, we're gonna just go through a few slides, and it's like 30 slides. People on my team are like, we get it, can we get to the demo? Absolutely, we're gonna get right to the demo after these 3 slides.
I have a theory about the future, and it's a pessimistic one. I think we're gonna keep asking people to join cyber. They are going to get burnt out. They're not gonna be treated correctly. They're just gonna be tired of what they do.
I have to be honest, I love business. I've had a couple businesses. You know, when you start your first business, you're all excited and you make a bunch of mistakes. As you make more businesses, you start to learn a thing or two, get a little bit better. When you look at a business, you look at all the components that makes it up. You look at marketing, right? How do you get the brand out to the world? The lifeblood of business is sales, because if you don't have revenue, then you're not able to pay your people, you're not able to invest in the company. And we have one of the best salespeople in cybersecurity, Jonathan. And I want to ask you, in the immortal words of Leonardo DiCaprio, sell me this pen. No.
This is gonna be fun. This is gonna be fun. So that's funny you start with this, right? Because this is a common scenario that happens, and we all know it's not about the pen. It's not about me. It's not about a company. It's about the customer.
So it sounds like you're not selling me the pen. All right, but we could be friends, and we also brought in another friend as well. We're talking about building relationships. We brought in Samara Williams, someone who I'm sure salespeople all the time want to build a relationship with as a purchaser of cybersecurity software, right?
Yes, I've bought a lot of things in the past couple of years, and that's kind of put me on this map. But the salesperson is everything. My first big girl job, I was a personal trainer, so I was selling myself. And that was easy to sell. I knew myself best, right? But I quickly learned that it was about the customer, as you said. So now that's made me very biased, especially when people don't do their homework on somebody like me before pitching to me. So.
Doing the homework. Why is the homework so important? I would imagine the homework is important, especially when I do something like when I step into the sales role, is that you really want to understand who they are. If you come in blind, I think you can sort of like start to pull it out during that conversation, but I think there's something special about doing the work beforehand. What would you say?
100%. I think it's one of the biggest areas that gets overlooked, especially in sales. You know, they think it's a one and done sort of conversation. It's not. These partnerships are stemmed way before the conversation happens. Practitioners doing research and checking out the companies and understanding things. But then from like the sales side, the time you get is incredibly valuable. You know, you take that measure of time and then you look at what the value of it is and you look at what you're bringing to it. So the mindset coming in is very focused. Is this somebody that you can help? And then more importantly, what's gonna be valuable for them? So preparation is huge. Normally when something goes wrong, it's 100% in the sales side, in their control, and it normally begins without preparation.
Right. You know, speaking of preparation, when we met, you were always prepared to show up, have a great time. And it never felt like you were ever selling me anything. And I haven't bought anything from you yet, but I know that if I were to, I would call someone that I know and that I trust that can give me great feedback and opinion, and you know, a product that I could use for my team. But what I see in my perspective is a lot of fluff on LinkedIn, on email. Someone got my email or my phone number, and it seems like in some ways they're the hacker, even maybe more so than I am, because they're able to pull so much of my personal information. So like when y'all think about cybersecurity sales, where are we at today?
It's a big discussion.
Yeah.
Yes,
It's a big discussion. I mean, especially the scenario you're talking about, LinkedIn and how powerful it is and all the benefits that we can all think about. and then you think about your inbox. Samara, your inbox right now, I can only even imagine what it is.
You gave me a little buffer there because I was really trying to think about like a one-word answer to talk about where we are in sales right now. And from my perspective, it's about quantity and not necessarily quality. It feels like salespeople are just throwing these messages out there, just trying to get as many practitioners, as many leaders, as many purchasers as possible. And a little trick that I like to use, okay?
Oh, yeah,
So in my LinkedIn name, I either have an emoji in the front or I put like a middle initial. That way I can tell if it's automated.
Right.
It's not gonna say hi Samara, it's gonna say hi Samara R. And I'm gonna be like, okay, so this wasn't personalized. I'm gonna sit on that one for a little bit. So that's for the salespeople and the practitioners.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. We do these polls on LinkedIn where we're trying to gauge how everyone feels, because we can't just go off of our feeling alone. We have to actually pull the data. And the poll was like, where are we at when it comes to selling in cybersecurity? The poll was whether you think sales is fine as is, like everything's good, everything's perfect, no improvements needed, some good, some bad on the next one. The one after that is, it's actually terrible. It's actually really, really bad and we need to change. Something needs to disrupt it. And then the last selection was, I'm a salesperson and I just want to know what everyone else is saying, because I wanted to invite everybody to the party. And it was funny, 60%, just about 60% said that there's some good and some bad, and that's to be expected. Only 3% said that it was absolutely fine as is. And there were some people in the comments really, really passionate about like, no, it's fine. I'm telling you, it's so fine. But I do think there is definitely some room to go. The other 18% was, of course, the salespeople that wanted to know the data. And then the rest said it was absolutely terrible and that there needs to be disruption. Where do you feel like we're going wrong when it comes to sales?
Samara?
Yeah, throw that one over to me. I think about our conversation. You talked about how there are now cybersecurity degrees and how there are now programs where you can get into for sales when before there wasn't. So I think change is inevitable. I would never answer that it's just fine as is, because I think it's going to continue to grow. I think it has a lot of growing to do as well. But then I think about us as practitioners as well, and relying on our vendors so much. You know, you're either a build or a buy organization. And if you're a buy organization, how many vendors are you working with? And are you making your own life harder?
Just the dynamics of how many companies, how many options, how many different programs, how many different items you're dealing, and then you subdivide that by the groups that you are. And then as opposed to, the move to consolidate and the move to kind of streamline the delivery of enterprise sales right now, there's incredible world-class talent that's out there. And then especially when you look at like the product sets and the relationship and the depth and the trust, it's at a tier that's eons compared to when I first got into it. And then as we were talking about, most people in sales today, they kind of got into it. They didn't have a degree for it. And that wasn't something. Now the program, so where are we going with it as well? I think the world-class experts, the ones who really take it as a trade craft to improve, they're sharing knowledge. You can follow them all on LinkedIn or their blogs, or they have their own side hustle. Knowledge is, the way they're spreading is really strong. And I think when I look at the next generation, they're coming in way more conscientious about what excellence looks like. They're coming in with a degree and intentionality, and they're really good. And I think there's way more perspective to get because of discussions like this to learn how do people think. So I'm excited about it.
I would imagine that part of it is reaching more people faster, more aggressively. I guess, what are your thoughts there? Like when you think about like the ecosystem that we live in as practitioners, it sounds like you take a different approach, but I'm sure that you've worked with organizations or peers, heard stories that where, salespeople are taking like more so these tactics.
Well, I mean, first thought, right? It's all about the customer, and then you back into it. Well, who's going to benefit the most from what you offer? And if you have the intention and you're like very specific on who you reach out to, that alone absolutely just stands out compared to like spray away or, here's, Jonathan, the human bot, sending a note all the time on things. And there's so many more ways to do social selling and come in with trusted relationships. There's ways to come in and actually participate, listening into podcasts, commenting, being part of communities. There's way more ways to authentically engage than the old show up at a doorstep or just, again, send a lot of notes with no response.
Right. Yeah, if I've seen your name on LinkedIn here and there, I think I'd be more likely to click on that message and be like, oh, I didn't even know this person was a sales.
Would you click on mine?
I would forever click on yours, Jonathan. But so, quick question for the table. We talked about having a sales program or degree that people can come in. We know that some cyber folks tend to get a little arrogant or act a little exclusive to those who don't have cybersecurity degrees and come up in. So are we going to continue? Are we going to see a rise in sales arrogance as a result?
Oh, interesting.
What do you think?
I've never even thought about that before as well. I mean, because of the degree and because of the specialization, is that what you're asking about?
Basically,
will there be?
Yeah, I mean, you still have to do your homework, right? There's still
100%.
soft skill aspects to a cybersecurity degree. It's going to be the same for sales.
I think the element that besides like tactics and like, you know, understanding which script to use or like which kind of approach, I think it's going to be more of like the humanistic element of it too as well, more of like the EQ stuff that I think that's going to really understand. Like I see specialization coming in and like, you know, I see the future of being like, besides sales and methodology and the EQ stuff, you could subspecialize in cybersecurity and get really into like understanding the personas and different tools and focus, maybe almost like cross-pollination between different programs within a university. I think there's incredible amount to like bring in those elements to it, and I think that's where it's gonna go.
Well, to your point, I've had sales meetings where people are just writing down everything that I'm saying because they don't necessarily comprehend, but they want to take it back to their engineers. But I have a conversation with you or other sales folks that I really enjoy, but it's a conversation. It's not Samara preaching about her problems to, to Jonathan.
How important is that? Really understanding the terminology, the plight of the practitioner. Is that super, super important, or can you still do business with a salesperson that has no idea what they're even really selling?
Depends on what they're selling. If it speaks for itself, you know what I'm saying? So the salesperson is everything, because we talked about functionality, we've talked about use cases that we need to fulfill, right, with a tool. But if the salesperson doesn't get me support faster, that changes renewal, that changes, expanding the portfolio and what you purchase. So I think it does in the maintenance aspect of the relationship, maybe not so much the initial.
Interesting. For what would you say? What is your response to that as well?
I really think it depends. I think it depends because I have seen tag team duos where you have like a really good salesperson and then a really good sales engineer. And they work together like seamlessly, because then I think you can kind of divide and conquer. I mean, it's very similar to when we look at CISOs, whether they're like really focused on business or they have a little bit of hacking ability. I think it's all about balance. So if you have something to offset the other, I think that works. But if you have someone that's really just kind of doing everything themselves, they're the only salesperson, they're the only one having the conversation, I think you really have to have that technical component, really understand the plight of the practitioner, the leader, whoever you're selling to. So I think that's really, really important. What was it like for you coming into the space of cyber? Like, did you find it was difficult to wrap your mind around everything that you were selling, or what was that journey like for you?
It certainly was, and I mean, I kind of got into it really by happenstance. I happened to find a company, it seemed like a really interesting fit. I understood what they did and it made sense. And it was an organization that did multi-factor authentication. And we had a successful exit and ended up joining Microsoft back in 2012. But the biggest thing about it was a really elegant and really clean product. And that was one thing I didn't realize at the time, like how clean, how smooth, and also how important that was. It solved the direct need. It was super easy for the customer, low drama, and just delivered. And that was something that always stuck with me because it helped the learning curve and it helped the confidence with it. And there's a lot of complexity between a lot of solutions that are out there as well right now. So for somebody coming in new, it's all about the leadership team that's there, what sort of enablement program they have. As you said, the typical tag team duo between the technical is an incredible approach to help for the customer as well. Because the technical folks, they don't really want to follow up on all the business side or own all that because they want to really own and establish the trust. I see the trend going where you're going to have more of the hybrid technical / business going into it a little bit more. That's what we're seeing a little bit more in the industry too.
Right.
You mentioned acquisition. So it sounds like you started in cybersecurity working at a startup. Would you agree with that?
Correct.
Okay.
100%.
And that's what I feel like a lot of the companies are at the, when they're selling a lot of cybersecurity software, they're trying to like make a name for themselves, they'll spray and pray. That's what you'll have to do or feel like you have to do. But what about that new sales engineer or that new sales rep that comes into a company? They don't know about the space. They don't have the contacts yet. What tactics are they going to take? What tactics would you recommend that they take?
I would be maniacal on your learning. And you can break it down into like passive learning, which is, as we were talking about earlier, consuming podcasts, reading blogs. I would just be a maniac on that. And I would see what really sticks and like, where do you get going? I think from there, you're going to organically kind of lean into whatever the interests are or the type of community as well. On LinkedIn, there's incredible stuff to follow. I feel like the industry itself is incredibly collaborative. And if you're reaching out and you're genuinely curious or you want to engage, you're going to end up getting that engagement. So that's what I would recommend is just learn, because the space changes so much. But I just think that's going to like dictate where you go next.
I would even say hang on to the coattails of a fantastic, salesperson as yourself or a practitioner that you may have met somewhere, and having those introductions from them and growing that way can kind of come with the credibility. There's like credibility inherently, and then you can build on it. It's much easier than starting from the bottom and trying to build that credibility.
Going to conferences was one of the biggest things that helped me out as well on my end. I know that's a little bit harder right now with people's travel budgets or situations, but like being in the room and bringing a humanistic element, and you see people and it's like you meet somebody in the shrimp scampi line, and then like, 36 hours later, you're best friends with them again because you see them in the elevator going to work out. So it's just funny things like that. At the end of the day, it's all humans trying to do good. And I feel like that's a way to accelerate your learning too, and your network. I've been in sales my whole career, so over 20 plus years. I fell into sales. I was doing car wash sales, the #1 pipeline for talent. And so I was doing a job in college and I happened to get noticed. And a Fortune 500 executive was going to get their car wash. And they gave me a card, and next thing you know, that was my first job.
Wow.
So I really got fortunate, my first opportunity. Over time, I ended up finding my way into cybersecurity, and I feel like it was a blessing when it happened. Where the space was, it was 2009. I joined an early stage startup. We had a successful outcome. It was really exciting, and I got hooked. And so I've always been with startups and part of the growth mission. It's where I learned to partner with practitioners and to learn. The space is constantly evolving. You have to keep improving. I think that's one of my favorite things about it. You always got to be learning and growing.
Let's talk a little bit about the badness that we're seeing from a sales perspective, because you were talking about the automation. You're even starting to manipulate how your name shows up in order to say, hey, is this automated? Obviously, I think to a degree, I'm sure sales is a numbers game. We need to have as many interactions as possible, but now people are looking at automation to enable that. From your perspective, would you ever look at an initial message and immediately be like, you know what, I'm going to enter into a sales cycle with somebody? Is there a message that would actually work?
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of salespeople assuming that I need their tool, for one.
Right.
And I'm not a huge fan of salespeople, hey, how are you? Trying to act like you're not about to sell me something. So I realize this is complex and I ask for a lot.
Right.
But I have found that middle ground where people are like, this is where I'm from. This is, who I represent. And I'd love to have this much time with you, 15 minutes, right? And tell you what I have to offer. I love messages like that. I do. And on a given day, you talked about meetings and providing value. On a busy week, I will average 10 to 11 meetings a day. So when a salesperson reaches out to me and they want my time, it's good to have that background knowledge. Like, okay, I'm going to prioritize these 8 different messages in my LinkedIn.
Right.
Who do I want to go after? Which one? Because I'm a gut person, right? So if I like the message, I'm going to reply to it, but it's generally in the middle of those two things.
When this airs, you're going to get a lot of messages this time.
I do reply to people.
Yeah.
So I'll say I will reply to all the sales messages that I get.
Really? Every single one?
I do. I reply to them. I don't like to ignore people. Sometimes I'm just like, hey, friend, no, I'm good. Or I'm like, you're going to have to schedule something with me in November. I'll push it out a few months and stuff. But I reply to everybody.
Wow.
Yeah.
So if all of a sudden you were moved over, let's say we did like a classic movie scene, we switched roles, and then you were on exactly you're on the business side.
Yeah.
What would you do? What would your approach be?
Oh my gosh. So I think I've said this to you before, but I do feel like I'll end up on that side, and I feel like I'm going to kill it because I love people.
Breaking news.
Because I love people. You know what I mean? And I will get to know the people. And I like looking at people as individuals and understanding how they communicate. And I will tailor my communication based on the person. And I will do my homework and I will find somebody that knows that person, right? I think it's a lot of preparation. It's a long con, right? But a positive con, right? like a good one.
So it is.
Yeah, exactly.
You're going to fit right in.
Right. And my plan is to get to where I am as a, practitioner, build that base, and then potentially, switch sides maybe, go to the dark side.
Oh.
We talked about the dark side.
Yeah, you hear that a lot, right, on there. Yeah. And so it's really fun to see folks with backgrounds that are grounded and they're cemented in like real truth, and they do move over on there. So it's always fun to hear somebody say they're going to the dark side. But the truth is that's where the industry is going, to be more specific for the customer.
Right.
Flip the question. You're in Samara's seat. You're back to back in meetings. You know that you have a little bit of hands-on work to do as well. And you have about 30 minutes to talk to someone that might have a product that you're interested in, but you have no idea. You never met this person. What do you want to see? If you were the practitioner, what kind of things, strike you as a customer when you put yourself in that seat?
I'd want some sort of framework to like lay out the state of my program before heading in. I feel like a lot of time gets wasted around that as well. Like if I was a practitioner, right, I would just want to either like have prepared, these are my top 3 to 5 things. This is the only area our team's focusing on with time and resources.
Yep.
Or like, these are kind of like my big bets if you're looking out over X amount of time frame. I think I would put that out earlier, and I'd put that out often. And then also, if there is absolutely no need, be upfront about it from the jump.
Yeah. Speaking of efficiency, I've been in so many pitches where it's like, all right, before we get to the demo, we're gonna just go through a few slides, and it's like 30 slides, and it's like, and then I've been in scenarios where people on my team are like, hey, we get it. Great company, love it. Can we get to the demo? Like, absolutely. We're going to get right to the demo after these 3 slides, and then they'll like go right back through them. When you're looking at the actual like sales event, when you're in there in person, how important is it to really understand like what do people want to see? Do they want to understand more about the company, or do they want to really get right to the tech?
Huge. And I think the biggest thing is to ask up front, like level setting. What's your engagement with us before this call? Why did you take this meeting? A simple little like self-hack is like, if you can't write in the invite the purpose of the meeting is and fill it in with 1 sentence, then you're probably walking into a meeting that's gonna head into that, or it shouldn't be happening. And it shouldn't be the duration that it is. So I think that's another biggest thing as well, because in our space, we've seen so many folks, everyone's moving and progressing and taking on new roles. It's incredible amount of times we'll go into a meeting, we'll just ask, what's your engagement been with us before? And our team will find out they've used our product at the last 2 or 3 shops, and they've got a really strong baseline. It's like, okay, great. Let's skip that stuff. We'll get you up to speed on what's new. You tell me, why are we here? So there's little things like that.
Right.
But if you just show up and you just, hit the play button and roll into the script, that's no good.
I've asked for the slides ahead of time before.
Oh.
Y'all hate that because you don't have the opportunity.
Hey.
I'm like, hey, I can read. So I'm going to do that, and I'll ask you any questions I'm confused about. Otherwise, tool.
That's
a good approach.
That's a serious approach.
Yeah.
I'll let you underneath of the hood of at least how Chris and I used to work together when we would look at new solutions. We would have a thread, and we would just like say, name a solution with a little thread emoji and start chatting there and talking about the ideas that we want to see out of this organization, out of this vendor, out of this product. And then also jump back in there after the conversation or the call, and then, take that and put it into notes ultimately and documentation. So that's how we, often look at it. I would imagine somewhat similar for you, but I want to know what happens for salespeople. You're talking about all this preparation in the front, and I'm sure at the end, what goes on in the mind or the calls of the sales organizations?
So I'll skip to the end, the punchline on there. It's all, when it's done well, remarkably boring.
Yeah.
That's the truth, right? It's natural, it's very organic. Behind the scenes though, there's a lot of rigor. There's different organizations have different processes or methodology because they want a consistent and unified customer experience. And when we were talking about organizations have multiple investments and multiple partnerships across the org, just within single companies, they might be talking with multiple streams of folks. So the biggest thing is staying true to the process and making sure that it follows and you don't just wildly skip over because you're excited. In the words of Samara, why are we here? What does she need? What's she building? And then you should have clear reasons of why you're moving from that process on to the next. And that's really kind of how it goes. But it's always following a process, and there's no surprises when it's done right.
Let's talk about the process, because I think it's changed. I became a student of sales, I'd say right around 2012, and it was very much that old school pressure sales, hey, close. Have that conversation and make sure you're closing business. If you're not closing business, you're not a good salesperson. But then I would say right around the social media era is where things started to change. And now you have things like social selling, like building a relationship. I know you said you don't like when people just reach out hey, I just wanted to get to know you. Thanks. All right, see you later. I appreciate it. I like it when people come to me and they don't immediately ask me of something. They say, hey, I love what you're doing with X, Y, and Z, the podcast, your business, whatever it is, and then kind of leave it like that. I say, cool, appreciate it, thanks, and then maybe they'll come back and say something else that isn't necessarily tied to sales. And I'm like, okay, cool. And then eventually, whether I put something out as a post or they see an opportunity to be like, oh, you're at XYZ company, and I just heard that they're looking for an XYZ solution. Then it's almost like, okay, they've already built rapport, ready to rock and roll. I've always wholeheartedly believed that you really do business with people that you like. I like you so much, even if I didn't necessarily need the solution you were selling, I'd be like, okay, how can I use this? How can I use this solution? I can't really, I'm so sorry, man, I can't use it right now. But I think that really having that relationship is super, super important.
I'm a little different. I'm very technical in nature. I like to get to the details and let you know if that's what works for me. Let me see the technical details of your product. How does it work? Not from a high level, but at least what are the features that I can use? And I don't necessarily need a direct conversation. I need a tour. And I think that's where I really live when it comes to the relationship of salespeople is whoever provides me the easiest path to take a tour, taking a tour of the slides, then jumping into the product. But I need to be the one driving. I need to be able to see this product work intuitively for me and then continue the conversation. So I would say there's rooms that we go into, this is the room for the slides, this is the room for me driving the product, and this is the room for me really bringing the team together in front of the salesperson so they understand what it is that we're trying to do. But I would say I'm a little different for that reason.
Well, we talked about homework, right? Getting to know people. If you look on anything on the internet with Samara in it, I like to have fun. I think that's pretty up in front, right? If I get into a meeting and I am just bored out of my mind, we talked about value, we talked about averaging 10 meetings a day, I might not want to talk to you again, I want to have fun. I want to be able to talk about all kinds of things. I don't want to get straight to business often either, learn about me and my team and my dynamic, right? Because we all like to have fun. I built the team. We're going to have fun. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's the aspect of doing your homework to maintain that relationship as well.
So that is very rare, and it's also very refreshing. And I think Ron, on your point, I think for organizations that don't have a community or a free model or some sort of freemium way to get the hands in the product, I think that's one of my favorite things what I love what the industry's been doing is they've been doing that because it's a reality. It's give me the documentation, give me access to the solution, give me some self-guided tours, and then you want more, right? You want to keep going depth, but it's I really like what's happening on that piece.
Yeah, there's a lot of like automation that I see now.
Oh,
where
boy.
Once you hit the demo and you wait 30 days, you'll start getting emails, little trinkets, little messages. Hey, Ron, thinking of you. Need any help with the product? Saw that you were using this feature. To me, that's somewhat surprising. Like, oh, how did you know that? But it's also very welcoming because like I have hit a problem within this product and I don't necessarily want to be sold again. I just want to know how I could solve it. And I think sometimes when you get into the call with salespeople, they want to resell it like almost like the feature didn't happen. Like, oh, this is on the roadmap. Don't worry about it. Look over here. We're going to package this up. Let's go to dinner. And then by the time dinner's over, I forgot. So I try to like really be laser focused on like really what works and what doesn't, and then reach back out to the salesperson.
So you appreciate it, like if someone immediately reached out to you and was like, do you want a demo for XYZ product? Do you often jump into the demo? Do you first do some research? Like, what does that look like for you?
I do some very light research. So one, the need has to be there. I think as a cybersecurity practitioners, the first problem that we run into is not knowing what we should be doing. We're just taking the information from our last job and trying to do it at our new job, and that never works out. So one, understanding like the need that I have, but then understanding the problem space that the organization really wants to solve for. I've worked with many startups and worked at many startups to where why I originally bought the product isn't what they were intending to do in the grander scale. Like maybe the whole vulnerability management product turns into EDR. Like they're actually trying to do something very big and grand, but I really wanted vulnerability management. So I like to look at the mission, the vision, and then the person who I'm speaking to. Where else have you worked? I think sales reps, especially people like yourself, you can predict lightning. Lightning strikes in similar, patterns in cybersecurity. The very successful cybersecurity companies and products, I think that there's patterns that salespeople see the best.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, that's what's fun about seeing the industry mature. They evolve, their team, the system, and all that. One of the best things that happens with a sales team is when they say no to the customer and they realize that like what your expertise is not a fit for what the customer's asking and can verbalize it. It sounds so simple, but that comes from the leadership on down. When that gets celebrated and recognized, because again, it's customer focused, and you can look and just say, that's not what we do. Our game's not about this. I think that's powerful. That's when you know you have a team of pros.
Right. Have you ever done that and someone been like, what the heck are you doing, Jay Wood? Why are you turning down this deal?
No, I mean, they understand, right, of why, and then everybody respects it too. Myself and my team, we've never sold somebody that didn't have a problem, that didn't have a need. It's not like on TV where you kind of like got all smooth and like super like charming, and then all of a sudden a Fortune 100 company makes a purchase through a complex purchasing decision with procurement, and it just doesn't happen like that, right? Buying is not like that anymore. So no, no one's ever pushed back, and then also no one's ever bought that like didn't have a concrete problem.
My mom didn't actually know that I was going to be born with a birth defect. It used to bother me quite a bit.
She is just like you guys.
The message of control and complexity doesn't just apply to one subject in life. That is a universal truth. When a challenge feels too big, break it down to the parts that you can control.
When we think about the Great Resignation, it didn't just happen to practitioners. It happened to salespeople, sales industry as well. Maybe not at the scale that it happened to practitioners, but it still happened. Our people in cybersecurity sales shift and change all the time, every 18 months to 2 years, essentially. So you never know when that salesperson you're talking to is going to work for a tool you might actually need later down the road. Or if that customer that you're dealing with is going to work for a company that you're going to be going after in the future. So it's important to keep those relationships strong and healthy, open and honest.
One thing that's been interesting in sales too is like, especially with COVID, it really like shifted and changed the game, because like all of us were locked at home, right? Way back, and you still think about the way we're operating. And a lot of the norms, the way sales professionals had made a living or they engaged with practitioners, they built trust, it got shut down. And so that's been a very interesting thing to see the way that sales itself has shifted more to a hybrid model now, where it is highly digital, highly remote.
I read emails, right? It's not, I don't need just like 2 sentences. If you send me good content, I'll read it. And I think when people can put more into the content and the delivery, as opposed to always having to do the face-to-face too, I can wait on the face-to-face.
So we got to go deeper into the subject. We just spoke about saying, hey, it's me again. I work at a new organization now, and COVID as well. Like COVID really forced many of us to think differently about work. Some of us had to leave our job opportunities to work remote to be, keep our families healthy and safe. And others lost their jobs. Maybe they went to a similar organization. Where are the lines of ethics when it comes to sales? Like in recruiting, the gold standard is don't poach, right? I would imagine in sales, maybe that isn't an ethical line.
100% needs to be ethical. I mean, on there with everything. I mean, number one, it is the foundation, is just trust and ethics. Especially in our industry, it's a really tight, well-connected group, and it's just the right thing to do.
So if you leave let's say you're working in the SOAR space, you're working for one SOAR provider or product, and then you go to another one, like how do you address your Rolodex, your contacts, your LinkedIn strategy? Like how do you reassess even though you work at a company doing the same thing?
Well, normally it's called a non-compete that's probably in place there with that as well. So you don't off of there.
I've still seen it though,
Yeah, I mean, it happens, right?
Well, the way I try to approach most things, whether it's talking to sales individuals, evaluating tools, recruiting, hiring people, I try to remove as much bias as possible.
Right.
So I'm not gonna look at the name, or I'm gonna look at the functionality and what it gives to me so that I can say which one is best for me, not which one, and is the salesperson good, but which one do I like? Which one has the bigger name? Which one, you know what I mean?
Right.
So I think that kind of goes into it as well. I've lost people to a vendor before.
Right.
And I try to assume that they take a similar approach.
You don't want to violate your non-compete. That's not a good idea. But there's other ethics that I see when it comes to sales, and it's the dinners, it's the gifts, it's all of the extravaganza. I think that is a very valuable tool as a salesperson, but there's probably got to be a line of when this is not a gift and it really feels like a bribe. I'm sure you've been in this situation where someone's like, hey, Chris, come to this baseball game and then let's go out to dinner.
Oh, I've had some nice experiences.
Oh, yeah? I've got some stuff.
Definitely. I've had some nice experiences. Unfortunately, I don't think any of those have resulted in a sale. Maybe I'm a bad customer. But I'd be curious about that too. Like, where is your thought process when it comes to the dinners, the events?
Low key normally is higher returns because you're gonna get folks that are there for that purpose. You see a lot of groups that do rent out XYZ or do an event and it's all on LinkedIn, and from there, I'm sure they're fun, but at least what I've seen over the years is just doing something that's a little bit under the radar is normally a little more intentional.
Let's tumble even further into ethics a little bit. When I was in college, I was a broke college kid trying to figure it out. And my best friend came and visited me and he was like, hey, do you want to get into technology? I'm like, yo, I would love to get into technology. That would be great. He's like, cool. I got this guy above me. He showed me the ropes. We're selling telecommunication stuff, phones, landlines, internet. I'm like, oh, that sounds really cool. He's like, it only costs $800 to get in. And I'm like, whoa, $800? Is this really something that I should do? He's like, absolutely. I'm like, okay. Never made a single dime. I gave my $800. I was struggling for months. And come to find out, it was one of those like pyramid type, mid-level marketing, whatever you want to call it. From then, I was like, you know what? I really need to believe in what I'm selling.
Yeah.
So whenever I'm selling anything, if I don't believe in it, I won't sell it. Like, can't do it. But I think that might be a luxury, especially when you're looking at the socioeconomic climate today, because now people need jobs. And they're like, you know what, I'll take a sales job. They just want a job, they want to survive. So where does that balance come in when you're looking at the thing that you're selling and whether or not you believe that's going to give the value to the customer or not?
Well, I'll kind of jump in from the thought of like, I'm really putting a lot of thought around how to scale sales teams and build sales teams and how do you do that at like a more impactful level. And seeing the way folks approach their craft is like the biggest thing that jumps out of if somebody's in there to try to chase a dime, or is somebody really in there because they want to solve a problem, they believe in the mission.
Right.
The folks who want to learn or they're excited, the folks who have gotten into the product and they're playing with the community version and they're curious and they're wondering why, you're like, that's somebody who I want. So I think on that piece, what you're saying of somebody coming in and entering, there's a lot of ways to get into the field, and there's a lot of ways to end up with money. But if you're just chasing dollars on there, normally doesn't see that play out well at the enterprise space on there.
There's one more thread that I'll pull through. There's one more thread. In cybersecurity, we spend a lot of time implementing solutions, trying to architect solutions, make it all work together. And sometimes we buy products and we don't ever get around to using them. The next year comes around, we're like, oh my gosh, I haven't used this product
At all.
but we still need it. We're still going to need it next year. And you have a decision to make. You could renew the product, which is just as risky because you haven't used it yet, or you could not renew it and then have to go through the pain of the sales cycle again. How do you weigh out those options?
I think when you look at a situation like that, who's the account manager on that?
Honestly.
Oh, I forgot we had this. It's been a year. And like, oh, hello, renewal time, right?
Well, I'm sure it's not always that simple.
To be fair, leadership changes in CISOs, changes in directors. I feel like there are so many components that go into that decision. Can we form a formal project around something like this to get implemented quickly with funding behind it? Do I have enough bodies on my team? Do I have enough resources? Do I have enough support? Can I augment my staff? So I am not one to just say, this didn't work, so it didn't work. I would, depending on if I did the evaluation to begin with or not, and what the competitors, right? So it's just it depends kind of situation. But knowing me, I think I would renew.
Yeah. And I'm sure the salesperson would want that as well. Like, I really want to see you use this product. I know you probably don't have the time, but just in case, like, you still would want to sell. I know I would, but I'm gonna yield to you all as well.
Well, yeah, so that's an interesting scenario and actually happening. It's happening a lot. I'm glad you brought that up because it's happening a lot because of that situation. So let's say one or two people in the organization did an evaluation, they purchased a solution. Those said one or two people move on. All of a sudden, that's not a good situation for both parties. So that's why, like, going back to having like intentionality and you have a project and you have requirements and there's rigor towards it. And typically rigor also includes like there's a team evaluation on the customer and the business side of things as well. Because then if all of a sudden somebody leaves, it's a bad feeling. You know, you've got a customer who paid meaningful money. They haven't activated it. Maybe they haven't even gotten off the starting blocks.
Right.
Or they've barely moved. That's not good, especially on our side. So there's like a pit of panic where you're like, we got to figure out, can we help them or not? And sometimes you decide, the climate changed or it doesn't make sense or, the reason why you bought isn't a fit. And other times it's like, we just got to lock in some people and let's make progress.
There's also that element at the end of the year, we all go into a frenzy and we have to use our money. I'm sure like we all find ourselves in that situation, right? I never feel good about that though. I never feel good going into a budget conversation, knowing if I don't use all of this budget, maybe I won't get that budget again next year.
Right.
For me, in my experience, it's been the money's not available until, and I gotta go. We've had this, what's the timeline? And I'm like, 6 weeks. What can we do, right? This is what I have. You come with what you have and we'll put something together. But I don't like the crunch time either. I don't like it.
So I was curious to get your take on that of just getting access and the whole budget process. And then even after that's happened, just the role that procurement's playing now in today as well. So I'd love to hear it.
Well, there is some finesse. There is some finesse that's required in relationships that need to be had prior to. You have to say, get your leadership behind you as well to say, we do need this tool. We can spend the money here. We can implement it in XYZ. I need your support to get this expedited. Because procurement's just as busy as we are. They have the entire organization to think about, right? Not just my little, cocoon of things. So it's all so much about relationships and maintaining relationships.
Yeah, and that's a funny part, right? I think folks think sales leaves the cave and then they come back in with a deal. And there's so many parts of it, even when you have a technical, like proven technical validity, you get the thumbs up and it's time to move on. Yep. Then it starts a whole other chapter of moving through an organization's buying cycle. Mm-hmm. It's wildly complex now, way different than it was even 10 plus years ago. Yeah. So that's also a very interesting evolving part. Yeah.
I got a two-part question. The first part is for you two, and then I'm gonna pivot over here to you, Jonathan. Oh. When we're in a pitch, we're talking to a prospective vendor for our program, and we don't see a feature that we really, really need in our environment. How often do you hear, oh, it's on the roadmap? Yeah. How often have you heard it?
I can't say when I haven't heard it.
I'm saying, I'm in the same boat, yeah.
Okay, part two, how often is it really on the roadmap? Is it really always on the roadmap?
Knowing zero context of the conversations you have and speaking on behalf of the sales industry, I don't know on that, but most times it's on a roadmap. Now you ask for the deliverable and the date and the exact timing, that's where there's some unknowns because things shift, priorities shift. So that's the toughest part of like the product delivery on what's out there. Right. It's on the roadmap somewhere, I imagine. And again, not knowing, but that's the toughest thing is when will it be delivered?
Right.
I want to know how is sales shaping up in cybersecurity? We talked about degree programs, more intentional training for sales leaders, but I would imagine it goes much beyond. Sales people are thinking differently. We talked about the procurement process is much different today. What are we going to see in the future going forward?
Well, we talked about just like the next wave of like sales talent that's going to enter. They're going to enter with a degree. And the degree is going to show that they've had like intentionality of this wanting to be a profession, not just kind of like plopping into it. They're going to enter with a skill set that's like beyond anything that I ever would have thought of having. But I think the biggest part is like the way sales is going is there's so much information share. And I think there's so many more examples of like what excellence looks like. I think there's so many sales leaders that have reputations and programs. They're almost like coaches that have like a coaching tree where you know like, hey, this person who came out of this, they run this sort of methodology. They have this sort of ethics. These are the people that thrive. And that's more going to be amplified on our side.
I have a theory about the future, and it's a pessimistic one.
Let's hear it.
I don't think the constant shuffling of practitioners is going to change. I think we're going to keep asking people to join cyber, join cyber, join cyber, join cyber. They are going to get burnt out. They're not going to be treated correctly. They're just going to be tired of what they do, tired of what comes with, being a practitioner in a corporate environment. And so unique solutions that vendors are going to have to come up with to make up for the gaps.
We've had folks who have come over from the practitioner side. They got settled, they really did well, and you know what? They moved back to the practitioner side. Yeah. And I think that's really neat too, kind of playing out because they've got a fresh perspective. They want to be there. They kind of moved over for other reasons and they realize they want to be back. So I think it's gonna be very circular, the way it's gonna flow.
That would be nice, it would.
I really think that you are one of the better salespeople in cybersecurity. Is there a moment when you think back to your entire journey, was there a moment that really made like an impact on how you developed those relationships? Was it a mentor or a situation that is like, you know what? That was really like an inflection point for me as a salesperson.
Oh, wow. That's a big question. I saw in an organization where it was modeled from the CEO on down. And then I had a particular sales leader that just kind of like embodied a very long game thinking. Right. And when the founder has that belief, it's cliche to say that the organization will mirror and reflect what the founder does, but it really 100% happens. And that's where it realized for me, like, it's okay to say no. It's okay to like tell a customer that's not at all what we do. Yeah. It's okay to say like, that's not ethical in those sort of elements as well. So I think it was that particular company that I was at. I saw it and the team was built off of it. And then, you kind of come into your own.
The older I get, the busier I get, the more I index on like how valuable a minute is or even seconds. When we were having conversations about like sitting down with Samara and Jonathan, we were talking about like our appetite for being sold to. I prefer to enter into those more meaningful sales relationships. You said that you were like, I love being sold to. I honestly don't have time to even read a lot of the messages. If I can tell that it's an automated message, I won't even read it. Like, no matter what the solution is, I just don't. It could be the perfect solution for me. I just don't have the time to read it. But what is some of your thresholds for whether you engage or not engage when it comes to being sold to?
When it comes to a phone call, I think it's about the story. I don't necessarily like to skip the slides part. I think that's the most important part. That's going to tell me the passion for, that this person has about this product or idea, technology. I'm going to see that. And then I'm also going to hear a great story. What is your big strategy? What's your vision? And what are the steps that you're going to do to get there? I think when you look at founders' histories, if you look on Crunchbase, for example, you could see where they've been and almost put together a nice story if the salesperson doesn't or the team doesn't. But I love the story. The way I look at it is we interview people day in, day out, whether it's for our podcast that we do, but even for jobs. Like, we've interviewed so many people and we only have about 30 minutes. So I'm making such a big decision on my team and hiring somebody maybe in 30 minutes or maybe 30-minute sessions if I'm lucky.
Yep.
I almost wish that I was able to be equipped with that same level of information in 30 minutes spending time with the vendor.
How do you think you get to a place where you feel, not only like you feel solid on the product that they're pitching, but also feel solid on the leadership, the direction of the company? Like, what are some of the go-to questions that you might have for that vendor?
Jonathan said it best, to send them a message beforehand. Give them the context that they need to be successful. You don't want to be on the call with someone and hinder their success, especially if you're using your time. So I think giving them that bit of information is valuable. I never really thought of doing that. I've been asked for it, but it's, time's so precious. I'm like, I just don't have the time. But if I really do want to pack it all in 30 minutes, I think that's the only way.
Both sides enter a meeting with a lot more information that is said or even acknowledged.
Right.
Because, there's, I think the part that I think that's getting better in the industry is putting more of the information out there.
I personally like when vendors ask questions first and leave their stuff and deprioritize what they wanted to pitch. And they're like, what do you want to know about the product or the company? And those are the questions that I want to answer, right? Like a genuine interest in what I need and my interest and how I want to move forward and get better. Before that, I was in the service industry. I was a server, and I worked at a breakfast place. So I woke up early. I knew I had a thing for people, right? I love people. But I kept rebranding myself. I turned into a personal trainer, and then I went into QA software analysis, right? And I just I still love people, but these aren't my things. Once I got to security, which is what my mom told me to do, so listen to your mamas, right? Once I got into security, I was home. So now, I started in threat intelligence. Now I work in vulnerability management. I have interests in risk and automation and all these things. I just want to make programs and people better. Naturally, I became a people leader. That was always the goal, right? My first sort of interaction with sales folks was when I was the subject matter expert for a threat intelligence team. And so I was the one gathering all of the requirements, all the details, and talking with people. They always thought I was a manager, right? Because I was managing them and everything there. But once I actually became the manager, I had the keys to the kingdom, I had the money to spend, things started to change. Now I was getting all the attention. I wasn't reaching out to them, they were reaching out to me. So just learning how to manage these relationships has always just been the psychology behind it is super interesting, the different people you get to meet. So I love that aspect of it.
I've been really looking at the way that Gary Vee kind of talks about business, the way that Chris Do talks about business. And what Chris Do says is stop selling, start serving. And that's always been on the forefront of my mind when I go and put on my sales hat. Yeah. It's never like, okay, I got to get the sale, I got to get closed. My first question in one way or another is always, how can we help you? That's always the first case. Like really understanding the plight that they're going through, where are the friction points, where are the pain points, how can we help them to go to the next level? And it goes back to really believing in what you're selling. How important from your perspective is it to really understand who is on the other end of that table and then deprioritizing the salesperson?
I really believe that we're just getting to the point to where we're practicing that, where I see sales reps practicing it, where I see CEOs practicing it, like practicing the pause, essentially.
Right.
Giving the space for someone to tell you what it is that they're actually working on. I think that's what it's all about, is, you know, doing that pause and getting the feedback. Like Jonathan, he's listening right now. He's taking feedback from us, a group of practitioners at a table, and I could see, you know, just the observation, the attention, and I see that you're very aware of the conversation, which is great. I think bringing that to the table is how I always get hooked.
Curiosity is a really great trait in some of the best performers I've seen in the space on both sides. On both sides, like I love a team that has high level of curiosity. They're very authentic. You know, they're having fun as well. But I think going back to that, like the star of the show is not their said salesperson. The star of the show is the customer.
Right.
And so like that's a big mindset shift too for people new coming in. They think they have to do so much. They really don't. It's all about the customer with the things. And so I think curiosity, I think leading in with the intention to make sure they're on there and listening. And listening's very hard.
It is.
It's very hard to do.
I can dovetail off that one. I do not enjoy repeating myself. So at one point, if I've told you, and I know I seem like a hard ass, I'm not a hard ass, I promise. But I take these tallies in my brain when I have to continuously like tell you what my issue is. And if you aren't able to necessarily give me those potential solutions, or you're asking me the same questions, or that it's a completely different salesperson now and I have to retrain them. And so, like, where did those notes go? You know, like just general sort of management in that way and managing my needs.
Right.
So I've been on the other side of that and guilty of that too. Going back to preparation, like things that are in your control, that's a perfect example of like when you just feel like, oh man, we weren't as buttoned up as we should. They told us what their XYZ tools were. They told us, you know, where their team's growing, and you're like, we should have known that. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I see it happens.
So it seems like there is a bit of a spectrum. On one end, you have the sales folks that they're just trying to make a buck. And then on the other end, we have folks like you that really care about the practitioner, want to develop that relationship and really understand what's going on in the world. And then there's everything else that's in between. How do we begin to move to a place where the sales and customer engagement becomes a much more healthy place?
I think this conversation is the starting point, right? I mean, that's why I was excited to be here, right? I mean, I was to sit at the table and to learn. I think the biggest thing is like practitioners sharing and learning and listening. And then what's happening is, like, again, the excellence and the good example that's out there, it's being amplified way more out there in the marketplace today. And then also there's so many more sales pros that are like taking it like a true craft and they're elevating their game. So I'm excited where things are and I'm excited where they're going.
Yeah, well, from my perspective, I think salespeople take the time to evaluate, take the time to say, am I with the right company? Do I believe in this mission? Am I going about this in the best way possible for my customer? Have I taken the time to do my homework and to understand their needs? And from a practitioner perspective, instead of talking about how bad vendors can be, tell them how bad they are. Make them better, because we are all in it together. It's not vendors versus practitioners.
At the end of the day, honestly, I think it's all about empathy, right? You have to have empathy for those sales folks that are trying to do the numbers game. Like, I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to do good work. They're trying to do their business. But I think just bringing in a little bit of that social selling, that empathy, the soft skills. And once you meet in the middle, I think that's a place that I think everybody can feel good in.
Correction can't happen without connection.
Yeah.
Love it. Let's cheers to that.
Same.